Sometimes it just feels like a character is dead meat from the moment we first meet them, and for one reason or another, there's no freaking way they're making it to the end of the movie with their hearts still beating. From villains you love to hate and couldn't wait to see die, to tragic heroes destined to kick the bucket, these characters all seemed like dead cert casualties in their respective movies. So let's take a look, as I'm Adam from What Culture, and here are 10 movie characters everyone was convinced would die, but didn't. Number 10. Cal Hockley, Titanic. Has anyone in the history of cinema been more obviously teed up for a brutal third act demise than Titanic's cartoonishly awful Cal Hockley? A walking, talking Disney villain if there ever was one, Cal treats his fiancée Rose more like property than a human being while sneering down at anyone below him, namely Jack, like there's money to be made in doing so. Cal's possessiveness of Rose grows increasingly twisted and violent throughout the film, such that it seems a given we'll see him die horribly when the Titanic sinks. But James Cameron opts for a more realistic outcome. Cal manages to worm his way into a lifeboat by posing as a lost child's father, and the last time we see him on screen, he's comfortably on board the rescue vessel RMS Carpathia where he searches for Rose. Now, to be completely fair, Rose's modern day voiceover does reveal that Cal committed suicide almost 20 years later after losing his fortune in the Wall Street crash of 1929. But for him to live almost 2 decades longer than poor Jack is all the proof you need that life just ain't fair. Number 9. Solomon Lane, Mission Impossible Fallout. Solomon Lane was introduced as the primary antagonist of the 5th Mission Impossible film, Rogue Nation, and uncharacteristically for most of the series' villains, he actually survived, instead being gassed unconscious by Ethan Hunt and taken into custody. Given that reports emerged shortly after Rogue Nation's release that Sean Harris begged writer-director Christopher McQuarrie to kill him off, when he was announced to be returning in sequel Fallout, it seemed dead certain that he was dead meat. But again, despite being so clearly set up to die, with the trailers even focusing on him near drowning in the back of a police van, Lane survives. Unlike the movie's other main villain, August Walker, Lane is handed over to MI6 at the end of the movie, though given that the character hasn't been featured in any of the marketing for the upcoming Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, it's looking like his role in the franchise may be finally over. Then again, don't be shocked if Harris returns for an uncredited cameo in either of the Dead Reckoning movies where he's finally killed off. Number 8. Nai, The Farewell. Now, one of the few non-blockbuster entries on this list, with 2019's acclaimed drama The Farewell. The film follows a Chinese-American family who decide not to tell their grandmother, Nai, that she's suffering from terminal lung cancer. The movie uses this framework to explore the difference in how Chinese society approaches death and family compared to more Western cultures. But ultimately, everybody watching expects the story to end with Nai's death, because why wouldn't it? But The Farewell instead ends with protagonist Billy returning home to the US after saying goodbye to Nai, who still has no knowledge of her illness, before the final title card states that 6 years later, Nai is still very much alive and doesn't know about her illness. Even more incredible, Nai is based on writer-director Lulu Wang's own grandmother, who according to Wang herself, only found out she had cancer when she saw the movie. Wild. Number 7. Miles Bron, Glass Onion, and Knives Out Mystery. One way or another, from the moment the first trailer for Glass Onion dropped, many were absolutely convinced that Elon Musk-esque tech bro Miles Bron would end up toast. Prior to the film's release, Bron was widely expected to be the focal murder victim, with the marketing cleverly concealing that, in fact, it's streamer Duke Cody who actually perishes. All the same, once the blindingly obvious truth was confirmed that Bron was behind every horrible event throughout the story, it seemed like Rian Johnson probably wouldn't show him the mercy that he granted to Knives Out villain Ransom. Given that Bron was such an obvious analog to Musk and a general avatar for greedy, immoral billionaires, it was reasonable to expect that he'd end up killed by Helen Brand, both for killing her sister and then burning proof of her sister's contribution to Bron's success. But instead, Helen decided to spare Bron's life, but to do something arguably worse, use his own volatile fuel Clear to destroy his mansion and burn the Mona Lisa to a crisp. This in turn leaves his reputation in tatters, enough that the assembled group decides to testify against him. Number 6. Billy Brennan, Jurassic Park 3. There are at least a couple of annoying characters in Jurassic Park 3, but Alan Grant's idiot assistant Billy Brennan, dude seemed destined to die on Isla Sorna. Proving himself to be perhaps the worst paleontologist in history, Billy ends up in a velociraptor nest and thinks it's smart to steal 2 of the eggs nestled there. Sure, Billy is desperate to fund his and Alan's work, but what use is it if you end up in a dinosaur's large intestine first? And that seemed to be the very karmic death in store for enthusiastic yet stupid Billy. Late in the film, Billy bravely rescues young Eric from some pterosaurs, only to be mauled and seemingly drowned by them in the water below. But in the final moments of Jurassic Park 3, Billy is revealed to have been miraculously rescued, albeit with considerable injuries. If Billy's survival feels hilariously tacked on, like most of the movie's third act, admittedly, it was because indeed he was supposed to die in the script. Yet this was inexplicably changed at some point during the film's famously chaotic shoot. Number 5. Alfred Pennyworth, the Batman. If you had your ear to the ground at all before the Batman's release, there were extensive rumors which suggested that Bruce Wayne's trusty butler Alfred Pennyworth was going to be killed off. The scuttlebutt claimed that Alfred would be offed by the Riddler, and given the bleak vision of Matt Reeves' superhero epic, it was incredibly easy to believe. After all, what better way to piss off Batman and push the audience's buttons than give the beloved character his first big screen death? And so, when Alfred opened the letter bomb addressed to Bruce, it seemed like a foregone conclusion that he wouldn't make it, leaving Bruce without his tether to the ground and ensuring he'd go totally off the vengeful rails. So what a surprise it was then that Alfred was merely hospitalized by the bomb and is still very much alive when the movie ends. Alfred's demise certainly would have made dramatic sense, yet getting to see more of the brilliant dynamic between Patterson and Serkis in the sequel is absolutely preferable. Number 4. Anton Chigurh, No Country for Old Men. Though obviously anyone who'd read Cormac McCarthy's source material knew that ruthless hitman Anton Chigurh survived the story, those new to No Country for Old Men's story surely expected him to get his comeuppance at the end. Given the movie's neo-western vibes, what could be more fitting than the grizzled gunslinger Llewellyn Moss triumphing over his assailant in the climax? But instead, Moss is killed by a third party before the finale, off-screen no less, at which point the audience is led to believe that aged in over his head Sheriff Ed Tom Bell will reluctantly step up and put Chigurh down. This doesn't happen either. Bell appreciates he's outfoxed by Chigurh and quietly transitions into retirement, effectively giving up the case. And even when it seems like karma might catch up with Chigurh when he's involved in a gnarly car accident at the film's end, he again survives, albeit with some considerable injuries. Number 3. Neytiri, Avatar: The Way of Water. The marketing for Avatar: The Way of Water heavily played up to the prospect of a member of the Sully clan perishing, with the second trailer pointing quite decisively at Neytiri being the most ripe target. After all, what would be more harrowing than the series' fiery heroine sacrificing herself to save her family in full-on Mama Bear mode? If nothing else, it would have certainly switched up the dynamic for the remaining 3 Avatar movies, with Jake being forced to care for his kids as a solo parent. But in actual fact, Neytiri survives, with it instead being her son, Neteyam, who was fatefully shot by one of Quaritch's men during the climax. As sad as it was to lose Neteyam, Neytiri dying so early in the Avatar saga would have been a staggering waste of Zoe Saldana's talents, considering she gives easily one of the best performances in either of the Avatar movies to date. Number 2. Hans Landa, Inglourious Basterds. If you could place a bet on who would absolutely, positively die in Quentin Tarantino's revisionist war epic Inglourious Basterds, it would surely be the detestable SS officer Hans Landa, played with ferocious, Oscar-winning relish by Christoph Waltz. How could Tarantino resist but offer up a horrific demise for such a vile human being? But despite Landa's death being the most logical endpoint, that's not what happened at all. Rather, Bastards concluded of course with the historically inaccurate demise of Adolf Hitler and the bulk of the German High Command, while Landa slipped out with his life intact. That is to say, the opportunistic Landa allowed the Bastards' mission to go ahead in exchange for a pardon for himself. But Lieutenant Aldo Rain didn't let Landa go without a parting gift, carving a swastika into his forehead, ensuring everyone he ever meets will know who he is. As much as everyone wanted to see Landa get brutally murdered with machine gun fire, this was a fitting end for him all the same. But before we get to our number 1 entry, if you haven't seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 yet, major spoilers will follow. This is your warning. Number 1. Rocket Raccoon, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Given that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was marketed as the last hurrah for James Gunn and his ragtag band of heroes, it was a fair expectation that at least 1 or 2 beloved characters would end up on a morgue slab by the film's end, right? And in particular, with Gunn making it clear that Volume 3's story was centered around Rocket Raccoon, many fans had themselves absolutely convinced that he wouldn't make it to the end credits in one piece. But alas, that thankfully turned out not to be the case, with Rocket not only surviving the movie, but ultimately becoming the new captain of the Guardians, after Peter Quill decides to leave the outfit and reunite with his grandfather back on Earth. Better yet, despite the movie's frequently grim tone and general feeling of finality, not a single member of the Guardians team died, with even other speculated deaths, namely Drax, not coming to pass. In an off-sad and upsetting film, the truly radical decision was letting everybody live, and what a smart move it was on Gunn's part. And there we have it, folks, our list of movie characters we were convinced would die, but then didn't. But please do let us know down in that comment section which movie or TV characters you thought would kick the bucket and then didn't. And while you're down there, make sure you give us a like and a subscribe. If you want to follow me on socials, I am at Strawn87 on Twitter and on Instagram. Come and say hello to me on there. Thank you for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and until next time, take care.